Well, Aimie, thank you so much for joining me. I don't want to waste any time, so let's jump right into the book. Will you start by telling our listeners what the School for German Brides is about?
Well, the School for German Brides is a story of two young women who are encroaching upon the phase of their lives, their late teens and early 20s, when they are embarking on their first relationships. And we have a young woman, Hannah. She is the typical blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan German girl who is her mother has recently passed away, and she is sent off to Berlin to live with her aunt and uncle. And she finds out very soon that they are fairly high in the Nazi echelon, and she finds out very soon that they are grooming her to become a perfect German bride. And that's where we lead into the School for German Brides, which was a real actual thing. And schools that were invented by Hitler and his group of thugs, for lack of a better term, in order to train German women to be good German housewives and mothers, to increase the German population, and to basically reduce the infant mortality rate, the maternal mortality rate, and to, of course, propagate the the Nazi ideology. And then you contrast that with Tilda, who is a Mischling, which means mixed. She has an Aryan father who has abandoned the family, and a Jewish mother. And she meets a nice young man, and of course, she's not able to pursue the career she wants. She doesn't have the paperwork to be able to go to law school. She wants to be a lawyer, and women couldn't practice law or medicine or any of those big fields at the time. So she's running her mother's dress shop, and her mother has to basically be in hiding most of the time to save her. But because Tilda, being mixed, looks a little bit, doesn't look quite as stereotypically Jewish as her mother, she can move around a bit more freely in society still, because this is 1938, still before the start of the war at the beginning of the book. And she meets a nice young man, and their marriage is fraught with a lot of difficulties because of their ethnic and religious backgrounds. And so we have the contrast between the German and the Jewish experience, entering into early marriage and motherhood in the School for German Brides. Well, and that was really long-winded. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's no secret that I adore the research process of all the steps that lead to a novel, especially with historical fiction. It is my favorite step. So I always like to ask authors what their research process is like. So I'd like to hear about any travels you did, or favorite sources, or exciting and interesting facts you discovered along the way.
Well, actually, the cool thing about this book, and you'll pardon the cameo from my writer, Kitty. This is Gigi Cat. He is super helpful in the writing process. But he lays on my desk the whole time. So he's a good research kitty.
He's beautiful.
Yeah, he's sweet. So the School for German Brides was actually born of research from across the Winding River. Of course, I'm pointing the wrong way. Across the Winding River, which you see in the background if you're watching the video. And I had a character getting married, and I'm like, well, man, Nazis had to have had some weird wedding traditions. There just couldn't, based on, so I researched this, and I stumbled across these bride schools that were like home ec with a lot of propaganda. And I thought, wow, can you imagine like a subversive young woman in that situation, and then, and trying to get out of it? That was my first, that's the way my writer brain works. And so I thought, it was basically the Stepford Wives meets the Nightingale. And so that's where the School for German Brides was born from. And so, of course, this was my lockdown book. And I had this discussion earlier with a friend that there's no way that I could have written this book in happier times, because it was the book that I was writing in little snippets in the middle of the night after homeschooling my children all day. Because of the lockdown and everything else. And, in 300 to 500 word snippets, just whenever I could, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And it was hard. It was really hard. And so if it had been a light, fun, let's go off to the Côte d'Azur and have a nice, fun beach read of a book. No, I couldn't have done that. But so I couldn't travel. I get to go to Europe again for the first time in a long time, actually. I haven't been back to Europe in way too long. But I get to go back this summer, but I didn't get to go for research for this book. So it was a lot of contact with libraries remotely. I ordered a lot of great research books off Amazon Marketplace, which is, I think a lot of historical fiction authors love finding old out-of-print books that way. Yes. And one of my favorites, I'm going to grab it off the shelf.
Yeah.
Was a bookshop in Berlin. And this really only features, okay, I'm going the wrong way. This really only features in a couple of 1 or 2 chapters. But I mean, it was about this woman. She was a Jewish French woman who had a French speaking bookshop in Berlin. And my characters, Hannah and her friend Clara, make a visit to this bookshop the actual bookshop in the School for German Brides. And I love how, I mean, she stayed to the last possible minute, and she lost her entire stock. They just seized everything because she was Jewish and not a German citizen. And yeah, it was just reading about her hardships was fascinating. So I took a lot of that emotion and a lot of her angst and put it into Tilda's character. But we actually, with other characters, get to visit Francois Frankel's actual bookshop. And they're buying illicit copies of Vogue magazine.
I love that. This is your 6th historical fiction novel, if I count it correctly, and you have a contemporary fiction coming up next.
Yes, yes.
So I'd like you to think back to, I think I read that you were 33 when you decided to write your first novel. Do I have that?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
So I'm curious what advice you would give to yourself at 33, or what advice you have for aspiring authors.
Okay, so I mean, the advice to aspiring authors, I always give the same piece, is stop aspiring and start writing. Because my first book, The Promise to the Crown, sat in a drawer for 10 years. I wrote it as the first chapter basically as a short story for a creative writing class that I was taking while I was in graduate school. And I was also taking a class on Canadian civilization, learned about the filles du roi, which were the women that Louis XIV sent over as mail order brides to help populate the Quebec colonies. I'm like, well, that's a great fodder for a book. I want to write that. And so I wrote like basically what became the opening chapter for at least a little while before I cut it. And I wrote that, but it took me 10 years to feel like I was somehow qualified to spend the time to write an entire novel. And I was 33. My daughter, the youngest of my 2 children, was finally sleeping through the night at 4 months old, finally. And, I figured, I'm getting a little bit of myself back, but I'm 33. And my grandmother, the women in my family lived to about 99, it seems like. And my grandmother, my great-grandmother, they lived to be 99 or really close to it. I figured I'm a third of the way done with my trip around this rock at best case scenario. And so I need to do something big with my life. And I couldn't go to the Taj Mahal or anything like that with 2 small children. So I decided to start writing the book. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write 3 chapters. And if I like it, I'll keep going. And then I did. I kept going. And then, 6 months later, I had a really bad draft of a book. And I gave myself permission to make it better. And then I invested in going to a writer's conference, and that was hugely helpful. I made great contacts and, eventually got an agent the next year and got a book deal 4 months after that. So the thing is that, everybody is going to tell you how hard it is to be successful, but you have no chance of success if you don't actually write the book. So write the book if you want to. And the thing is, you don't go in with the expectation you're going to become rich and famous, because you will be disappointed. It will never be enough money or enough attention. It will never be enough. If you go in with the expectation that you might leave something worthwhile behind on the human record, that's something that the rest of us can do. To just leave behind something of yourself for humanity. And that's always, my chief goal is to leave something behind that's worth reading. And maybe nobody will read it in 50 years. Maybe nobody will read it in 100 years. but at least I know I've left something of myself behind that, you know, somebody might stumble across in 200 years and say, well, that was an interesting look back on history from, you know, the perspective of 80 to 100 years later, you know.
That's beautiful.
So,
I like that. I like thinking of writing that way. It's much more fulfilling than setting out to be rich and famous.
Yeah. And, you know, I think a lot of writers, though, to be fair, they just want to be able to write full time and make a living at doing what they love. And I get that. But I know a very few of us who don't have some sort of small side hustle at best. And, you know, it's just the truth of the matter. But I think that, you know, that's not an unreasonable goal. It's nice to be able to, because I feel like I don't have time to do anything but write and maybe raise my kids when I'm trying really hard. But, you know, the truth of the matter is, you know, it does get to the point where you have to, if you know, you have to choose between, you know, are you able to devote the time that your writing career needs to give it a go? Or do you have to have, you know, a full-time job? I mean, it gets really hard once you reach a certain level of success, because right now I'm editing 2 projects, drafting another. And of course I'm with you marketing the School for German Brides. And so it's a lot. And so you have to, you know, I'm very fortunate. I'm privileged that I've been able to devote an entire, you know, I devote most of my time to writing now, which is a blessing. It's an absolute blessing, for lack of a better term.
I love to hear what authors are reading. They always have the best book recommendations. So can you tell us a bit about your reading world, what you like to read, what books you would recommend right now?
I am so excited for Sonali Dev's The Emma Project. I love her stuff. I've read the other 3 in her series. There are, of course, modern day Jane Austen retellings. Of course, we have Pride and Prejudice and Other Flavors, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. Recipe for Persuasion, the best title ever, in Sense and Sensibility, which is, of course, Sense and Sensibility. And then the one that's coming out here in about a week, is The Emma Project, which is an Emma retelling, and it's a modern day from the perspective of an Indian American family, which I absolutely love. And so I'm really excited for that one. I haven't read it yet, but I hope to. I'm reading some great arcs. I've got Jenny Walsh's, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the title. Her newest book that's coming out. I just got an advanced review copy of that yesterday. I'm very excited. And for those of you who really love the School for German Brides and want to learn more about kind of Hitler's policies behind it, the Lebensraum Project, there's Cradles of the Reich, which is coming out in a few months, and with Jennifer Coburn as the author. And it is, I got a copy on my desk. I have to read it. And I'm very excited about that one as well, because I think it gets into kind of the deep, dark crevices of history that we don't learn about in, you know, history classes. And I think it's important, you know, because we've rehashed the story, and some of them are so beautiful, of the French resistance and the British resistance. And they are stories worth telling, but understanding the history from kind of more of the point of view of the bad guy. And that's kind of what the School for German Brides does. Give us an insight as to why it all happened, so we can prevent it from happening again. And I think that that's valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also want to talk about what you're working on. Is there anything you can tell us about it besides it being contemporary? And what made you make the switch to his contemporary from historical fiction?
Well, I'm not switching per se. I'm actually diversifying. That's the word. So I actually, the timing is still up in the air, but my next historical is a dual timeline with the Paris Commune and post-World War II. So think Les Mis meets Chocolat. And it's called A Bakery in Paris, and it's coming from my good friends at William Morrow. And that will probably either be in spring of 23 or 24. We're working on that. And then my contemporary, which takes place in Provence, it centers around a young woman who has never fit in with her family. And her mother was an immigrant from France, and her mother dies when the main character is about 13 years old. And she and her mother was always the one that she related to the most, but her father, being very straight-laced, you know, kind of yuppie, old money Connecticut style family, and her mother was this bohemian immigrant from the south of France. And so she's always felt like she never belonged in her own family. And so after her father passes away and she gets a small inheritance, she goes off to the south of France, and she discovers a family mystery and some other kind of really cool things. There are dashes of magical realism and a cute black cat, and it's going to be great. And we are working on the title for that one. Like literally, I think they had a meeting about that today. So that's always exciting. And I'm also working on a collaborative novel with two of my dear friends, Rachel McMillan and Janelle Sosowski. It's called The Castle Keepers, and that's coming in March of next year. And it's a collaborative novel. All takes place around one beautiful castle in the north of England. And it takes place kind of in the shadow of three different wars: the Boer War, World War I, and World War II, and the impacts that those conflicts have on the castle and their family, the family that lives there. And so I'm working on edits on that right now, and it's been brilliant fun. And working with two very talented authors, it's been a great experience.
Is this your first book that's co-written with other people?
Yes. I mean, I submitted it. I have one short story that was in a collection that was kind of, it was a charity anthology for women in engineering, and it's called, The Brave New Girls. That's right. And but that was a short story collection, so a little different. But this is definitely my first collaborative novel. And it was so great to work with two people that have such compatible working styles, and they're just great people. And it was great. We talked daily, like a lot, through like Facebook Messenger, and just having that camaraderie through the height of the COVID lockdown and everything was just a lifesaver. Just a lifesaver.
You have a number of books that take place in the 1940s. Is there something about that time period that you're particularly drawn to?
Well, I think there's so much rich history to be mined from the World War II era. And of course, it's something that has captured the attention. It's part of the zeitgeist right now. People are so interested in learning about more about World War II, because our World War II veterans are dying off. Our Holocaust survivors are dying off. And of course, so it's through the natural course of human events. I think there's this sort of desire to hold on to that history in the last dying breaths of having that record, that living record, still available to us. And I think that there's also an interest in hearing the women's stories, because you'll notice that all of my books are very women centric. Yeah. And learning about the kind of untold stories of the women that were either part of the conflict or lived through the conflict is really important. And it's something that is, especially the more you go back in history, the fewer women's stories are documented. And so that's why historical fiction exists, is to shine a light and to tell the untold stories that we don't learn about. And, Bailey's History of the United States that we all used in U.S. history in high school. It's just it's just a different form of learning about history.
That is one of my favorite things about historical fiction, is that you get to, it's in a very approachable way to learn about history.
Yeah, and I think that's why people enjoy it so much. And I mean, it was always the genre that I gravitated to as a reader. Gosh, back when I was even, middle school and whatnot, I always loved things that were set in the past, whether it was a historical romance or, YA set in the past, what have you. I loved it. And I think there's a transportative effect to historical fiction that most people really resonate with.
I also want to share how people can find you. Can you tell us where you hang out on social media and your website?
Yes, I am very active on Facebook. And so if you search for Aimie K Runyan, that's AIMIE KRUNYAN, you will find me there. I am at Bookish Aimie, AIMIE, on Instagram, and at Aimie K Runyan on Twitter. And notice that my Instagram is not the same as my Twitter, because I got locked out of my Instagram. And yeah, that's a long story. And my website is www.amiekrunyan.com. And I would love to see you there. And I've got a great newsletter that comes out once a month. And I love hearing from my readers. There's a contact form if you ever want to send me a message. And yeah, I'd love to hear from everybody. I love to see people on social media.
Aimie, I loved this. It was such a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for joining me for this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And I hope to talk to you again about my future projects.
I would love to.